Um, I do believe that her lies were always in the service of not wanting to hurt anyone. And in thinking about Anais, I went back and looked at my own diaries. And I did go ahead and go to Indiana and was miserable there. And during this time, I was writing a script, or trying to write a script of the novels for Henry Jaglom, something Anais had put together. And I had finally sent the script to Jaglom and didn't hear anything. So I called him and he said, and I said, well, what did you think? And he said, it was a mishmash. It was just a mess. And I was devastated because I felt like I'd made a mistake in going to Indiana. Now I failed at that. And I wrote a letter to Anais and didn't hear from her. So finally I called Anais and I said, well, did you talk to Henry? She said, oh no, I haven't talked to Henry. And I said, well, did he send you the script? He said he sent you the script. She said, oh no, I haven't seen the script. And then she changed the subject with when was I coming back and how lonely I was, and she ended up making me feel wonderful. Well, I realize now she'd been lying to me. She'd seen the script. She'd talked to Henry, but that was Anais. She knew when you were vulnerable, and she knew when you couldn't handle the truth. By the same token, she was sensitive enough and committed enough to your growth that she knew when you could handle the truth. She bugged me to give her my diaries to read. And I resisted, and finally I did. And the first ones, she was very complimentary. She didn't say much. Then she wanted to see more, and I gave her more. And by that time, she thought, I guess, that I was strong enough to hear her criticism. And boy, it was thorough. She said that I was detached from my emotions, and she taught me how to get in touch with them in the writing and through the writing. She said that my intellect was a kind of madman that took over. She said that they were superficial, and she taught me her technique for diving deep. And all of that I learned from her, I was able to use when I wrote the new diary. The thing that most critics of Anais missed about her, and that both her biographers, who wrote very thorough and scholarly biographies, missed because they never knew her, was Anais' sense of humor. And she had a sense of humor about herself. It was delightful. For one thing, she was a terrible driver, and she would make fun of her own driving, finally to the point where she said, well, Rupert doesn't let me drive anymore because I always get into accidents. She also made fun of her identification with the erotic. I once asked her how she kept her great figure, and she said, oh, I just put my legs up in the air now and then. Rupert helps me. Even when she was battling cancer and she was getting radiation, she learned to use imaging and meditation. And she would imagine her peak joyful experiences when she went under the radiation. And I asked her, well, what kind of things do you image? And she said, oh, the golden light in Acapulco, and making love with Rupert in the cabin in Sierra Madre, and the first time I made love with Rupert, and making love with Rupert in the new house. And then she stopped and she thought, It seems like all my peak experiences have to do with making love. And she laughed and laughed. She was very curious. She wanted to know everything about what I was studying in women's diaries. And when I did a tape of women's erotic fantasies with some of my friends, even though I said, oh, no, you can't hear it, you can hear the waves, and you're not, she would not let go until I let her listen to that tape. She was, Stephen, do I have 2 minutes? Okay. She was joyful, and her joy came from her connections to others. She understood the idea of 6 degrees of separation long before that term came around. There was one party I remember she passed out to all of her friends a chart on which she had made a circle and spokes off of it, and she showed the connections of how each of us had met her and how we were connected to each other. She always made sure of introducing members of her circle to each other so that we all knew each other, so that we all had each other when she was gone. And she was wise. She and I shared something that connected me to her and made me identify with her, and that is we both suffered father abandonment when we were, I was 11, I think she was 9. And I would use it as a crutch sometimes, and I remember one time I was telling her, I was dating Michael Pinder, who was a rock star at the time from the Moody Blues, although he was already a has-been by that time. And he'd taken me out with 2 of his children from his first marriage, and Anais wanted to know all about our date and all about him. She always wanted to hear about your boyfriends, and I said, well, he took me to a carnival with his kids, and I really think he sees me as a second Mrs. Pinder, and I'm just not set up to be a wife and a mother. And she said, Tristine, stop projecting your own fears and your own, problems with the father onto men. She said, it's your responsibility to deal with your neurosis. She said, the hole in you and the fears and the problems you have, that's up to you to take care of, to satisfy, and don't project it on the man. I can't help but wonder what Anais would say if she were here tonight. She would, I believe, be pained by the anti-intellectualism and the materialism of our times. She would, I know, encourage us to support each other as artists. She would remind us that it's our job to keep culture alive while the world is at war. And when the world has gone a little crazy in its beliefs in absolutes and ideals, she would remind us that it's the connections, the human connections between people that keep us sane. She would remind us of the example of herself retreating to the houseboat during World War II on the Seine to stay in touch with the rhythms of nature. And she would remind us that it's the artist's job to keep our sensitivity, our kindness, and our culture alive until the world is ready for it again. Because of time, I'm not going to read my quote.